Okay, I'm speaking with Marine Corporal Charles Jones. Charles, Veterans Day is coming up here real soon. Let's go back in history here a little bit. Why did you originally join the Marine Corps? How did you and the Marines connect?
Well, basically, I was a volunteer. I volunteered in 1965, the 3rd of March, 1965. And I became ineligible in school. I was running track for Central. And I came up my senior year, I was ineligible. So I thought I would join the Marine Corps. And that's what I did.
How soon after that did you wind up in Vietnam?
We ended up in Vietnam in 1965, August. We floated off the coast of Vietnam, and we landed in September 1965.
Now, when you were going through basic training, how was that for you? I mean, did they holler at you back then, and were you treated unfairly in any kind of way? How did you get through basic training, and was that a good experience for you?
Yes, it was a great experience because it taught you survival techniques, and not only survival techniques, but it gave you a military mindset, which taught you discipline and taught you respect for authority. And all in all, I think it was a good experience.
All right, so when you first found out that you would be going to Vietnam, what went through your mind?
Well, once you're trained, we had left boot camp, and once you're trained and you get that expert training and as being a Marine, you have a lot of military competence. You can think for yourself. You can lead if the situation comes up where the platoon sergeant or the squad leader gets killed. You can take his place and perform his function. So it's a good leadership experience, and all in all, it turned out to be a pretty good experience.
What is it about the Marines that, what do they do that's different, in terms of going into a country? Why did you choose the Marine Corps over the other branches?
Well, initially I had wanted to further my sports career, and hopefully that I would get in social, special services where I could play basketball or football or run track. That was my initial idea. But after, being in the Marine Corps, you find out that everybody is essentially a rifleman. A cook is a rifleman. Everybody is a rifleman, and it's a very militaristic organization. It's for first to fight. That's one of the mottos, and it's strictly about combat and about you fighting the wars of our country.
Were you tuned in to the political side as to why we were there, or were you just more concerned with what you had to do once you got to the war zone?
I was more concerned with what I had to do once I got to the war zone because, initially all your instincts take over to survive. There is no, I had no political consensus, and you get a military outlook on everything. You think about saving your partner or your buddy, as they say, and you get tight with a very unique, different individuals, and that's all you think about it, and making sure that he doesn't get killed, making sure you do your job, making sure he does his job, and you're really just a tight group of Marines.
Once you got over there and you saw someone shooting at you or you heard a bullet whiz by your head, how did that, what did you think about that, the first, on that first experience?
Well, it was a sudden shock of reality because you never are quite prepared for war and until you actually get into a firefight or a combat situation. And what I thought when I heard that them bullets going over my head, my mind said, this is it. This is what you've been trained for all these years. I mean, all these field problems and all the different things that you do to prepare for war. And that's what went through my mind. This is it. And then automatically your training takes over. You hear that bullet, you hit the ground, you put a round in the chamber, and then you try to find the enemy and return fire. Your training takes over.
How long did it take you after being there before you got into a life or death battle?
It was, I think, 1965 October, Hill 22, and we were on an outpost, and it was 243 Marines got killed that day. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, Alpha Company, and the hill got overran. We got hit. The hill got overran. We got hit in broad daylight, which is rare. And whenever you get hit in broad daylight in Vietnam, you're usually outnumbered, maybe 3 or 4 to 1, because they'll never take us on when the odds are even. And we fought for about 2 hours. They overran the hill and ran us off the hill. Then we got reinforcements from Charlie Company, and then fought hand to hand and got them back off the hill and drove them back in the jungle and took the hill back. But that was about God knows, about a 6-hour battle, and that was on Hill 22 in October of I think about either the 14th or the 15th, or I think that was when the battle occurred. But it was a 6-hour firefight.
I mean, but what took place in the battle? I mean, was it hand to hand or just shooting at each other?
Well, firstly, they hit us with machine gun fire. We were just like on a regular day. Even in war, everybody was going to chow. We were getting food and loading our magazines, getting ready, for the night ambush or either run patrols all around Hill 22. And they attacked us with 60 millimeter mortars and heavy gunfire, machine gun fire. And so they pinned everybody down initially, because we was just walking around, doing our duties, cleaning our rifles, whatever. So they put mortars on us and heavy machine gun fire. And so initially, and then when they got that blanket down, they overran us. They overran the hill, Hill 22. So they came through running over the hill with AK-47 fire. So we killed the ones that came on top of the hill. And after a while, it was ours. It was then some of the people. It was a sergeant I knew. They came in and jumped in his hole with him, and blew him up with a satchel charge of C4. So it was hand-to-hand fighting and that type of action. It lasted quite a while,
Did you ever engage in any hand-to-hand combat yourself?
Well, yeah. It's like when they took over the hill. The enemy actually came in and took the fighting holes that we had. They occupied our position. So me and Sergeant Keys, he was my ITR instructor at Camp Geiger in California. He is a 6-degree black belt. So we went into the fighting holes that they had occupied. They took up half the perimeter, and we took them on hand-to-hand combat, and we took the positions back. I'll put it like that. But we engaged in hand-to-hand combat. He was a 6th-degree black belt, and that's what we did. We took the fighting positions back from the enemy.
Curious, when you go hand-to-hand with an enemy, does your training, in a kind of fighting come back to you, or is that more the street fighting that comes out of you?
Well, no, we had karate classes in boot camp, and we had instructors, and we go through training, bayonet training, fixed bayonets, and then you fight hand to hand with the enemy if he overruns your position, or whatever you have. Sometimes you have to use an entrenching tool, but your training takes over. We're some of the best trained in the world. It's not just said about Marines, but they are some of the best trained. We were some of the best trained in the world. We were trained in, I think about 6th and 7th week, we had karate training. We did, then we had hand-to-hand combat training, fighting bayonet with the enemy, or the mock-up enemy with your M14. We fixed bayonets, and pugilist training. They really call it pugilist training, and you go against another Marine and you fight him, and when you land a deadly blow or a killing blow, the referees stop it, and 2 more Marines go at it again. So we were trained in hand-to-hand combat, yes.
What experience happened over there that's been the hardest for you to get out of your mind, either good or bad?
That's a pretty difficult question. Uh, I think, early on, right after that battle, right in that same time frame, because the battle continued into the next day. And the night before, I had talked with my lieutenant. He got killed. And he came over to my foxhole that night before the battle, and he says, he had a premonition. He says, Jonesy, I think I'm going to get it. I said, sir, I said, that's a bad thing to tell your point, man. I said, because I might lose my life trying to save your life. I said, I wish you hadn't told me. But that was one. He got killed initially after we fought, took the hill back, Hill 22. We went down to sweep the area and they ambushed us right at the river. And he led the charge, and he ran into a minefield. And he was killed instantly by the mines, and he was shot with AK-47 4 times in the chest. And I saw him. When they hit him, he wasn't no more than 5 meters in front of me, because I was on the point, first man out to contact the enemy. I'm supposed to scout and contact the enemy. And he took the leadership, and they killed him. That was really hard for me to take. And we called in for reinforcements, and we called in for a medevac, or the helicopter, to take him back to the rear echelon hospital. And it was really traumatic. We went into the minefield. Me and I'm trying to think of Bradahurst, Sergeant Bradahurst. He was a squad leader. Me and Bradahurst walked into the minefield and took our rifles and made a sling and put his body, we didn't know whether he was alive or dead, on the sling. And we called in for a helicopter, and we medevaced him back to the rear echelon area, the hospital in the rear of 1st Marines hospital there. That was really an intense combat experience and a prolonged combat experience. Like I said, it lasted about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 hours, the firefight. And then when he got killed initially in the first rounds of the ambush, I was right behind him. And then they hit us he walked into a minefield. So that was rather traumatic for me and for everybody, to lose your lieutenant, in combat, and be in a firefight for about, I guess, 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, you mentioned that you were a point man. How long were you a point man? And that's about the most dangerous position to be in, isn't it?
Yes, I was a point man all the time I was there. I spent, on my first tour of duty, I spent 13 months in Vietnam, and I was the point man for 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. And, it is dangerous. But once you know what you're doing, and you feel like you know what you're doing, and then you engage the enemy, and you find out that if you see him before he sees you, if you can get your squad or your platoon or your team in position, and you got the fastest trigger finger, you win the battle for that day. You've got to be sharp. You got to know what you're doing. And then after a while, it becomes a job, and you get good at what you do. And so that's basically, without any egotism, in your training. The training is great. It's excellent. And that's what happens when you're, usually a point man.
Hate to ask this question like this here, but were most of the black guys point men, or was that just a duty that was just assigned across the board?
Well, it kind of depended. There was an unproportionate amount of African Americans in Vietnam. There was an unproportionate amount of African Americans in different platoons. It really, it really depended on your how good a Marine you were, how well trained you were, if you went to guerrilla warfare school, and whether it's being in the Marine Corps is just like similar to college. You go to classes every day. You learn how to read a compass. You learn how to read a map. You learn about the enemy. You learn about his equipment. You learn the muzzle velocity of that AK-47. They've got 30 rounds in the AK-47. We had 20. So if you ran into the enemy and you have a firefight with him, he's got more ammo. He's got 10 more rounds. So you got to make your rounds count. So it's more or less your training. If you're trained well, and we were trained well, usually, things worked out in your favor.
Did you have any, okay, when you came back? Now, how long were you over there before you came back to the United States?
Uh, I was in Vietnam uh, 20 months in two different tours. The first time I was there 13 months, and the last time I was there 7 months. You know, and I did two tours of duty in Vietnam.
Did you, when you came back to the United States, come back to Fort Wayne, did you have any post disorders to where you couldn't sleep, or you want to go shoot somebody or beat somebody up?
Uh, you know, no, nothing violent toward anybody. You come back, after that much time in the jungle, you're trying to, it's kill or be killed. You have night sweats. You have nightmares about, like I mentioned before earlier in the conversation, about the lieutenant. I knew his family. He showed me his family. So there is a traumatic experience, with being in combat. Me, myself, I was, I had a lot of nightmares and sweats, about different incidents. Yeah, but I never, I adjusted. I had a lot of help from World War II veterans. I had friends. My godfather was in Guadalcanal, and two of my godfathers, and the other one was in China, Tibet. So they talked with me. I got home, and then, there's another close friend. He was in Tinian and Guadalcanal, too, and they talked to me. I had a lot of World War II vets say, hey, you're home, take it easy, relax, go back to school, go to college, play football. I had a lot of help from the World War II veterans and Korean veterans.
So what happened when the guys came back to the United States? I know that they weren't greeted like the other war heroes were. What led to Vietnam vets really being hurt all the way to the point to where there's so many homeless veterans today?
Initially, I would think that when you talk about no parades, no recognized acceptance, we were called baby killers and a whole bunch of other unworthy names. It's basically America, the propaganda of the communists. And there was Americans going to North Vietnam, talking with Ho Chi Minh, and I'm not going to name them. Everybody knew they went over there, and so it was a disappointment. They would talk to over the radio. Hanoi Hannah would call in and say, "Well, hey, why don't you lay down your weapons, Marines, black Marines? The Imperial country of America has you over here killing third world people." So the propaganda was horrific, and then the war effort was also aided by the protesters in the United States of America. The protesters were going around and all over the country talking about the Marines and talking about the Army Airborne and talking about all the Vietnam veterans. And it was the first war that the American people were not behind and for universally. Everybody was for World War I. Everybody was for World War II, and there was more Korea, it was something like the Forbidden War. There wasn't, it wasn't too much said about Korea. But Vietnam, the propaganda was horrific by the Chinese communists and the Russians. They did a great job on the American public.
And that was, the sentiment there was embodied by the veteran themselves to where it took a toll on them?
It's a psychological factor. It would always, if you got into a fight, for example, and you know me, and if I stand and cheer the other guy on that you're fighting, you're going to say, well, hey, what's wrong with Charles? I thought he was my friend. So it has a demoralizing aspect psychologically you know. And you said you'd be fighting this guy. You said, well, you know, and if he was winning, you know, whichever the case was, you said, well, why didn't Charles break it up, or why wouldn't he support me or anything? So the same kind of analogy can be applied to the propaganda machines of the Soviet Union and the Chinese communists. They worked on the American public like it was horrific. Then it was the longest war in the history of the United States, 10 years. And there were people going to China and going to North Vietnam, and they were sanctioning, well, bring the Vietnam veterans home. That's an unfair war. It's an unjust war. You know, we shouldn't be in Vietnam. So that was the first war, to my knowledge, that the American public was not behind the veteran.
What can be done today, if anything, to help the veterans? I've read articles that they're suffering from issues all across the board, especially homelessness. But what can be done to fix their problems, if that can be?
Firstly, you know, you've got to address the city governments and the county governments that have veteran representatives within their government, and the state and the federal government. And you've got to have an interaction of compassionate people that understand, professionals that understand homelessness, understand psychiatric displacement, that understand nervous conditions. And then there has to be, you have to go out into the field. If we say that they're under the bridges and they're sleeping under the bridges, or they don't have homes, go under the bridges and take them food, take them blankets. You know, you've got to have a continual outreach of people and an outpouring of compassion, and let these veterans know that they are loved and cared for by the American people.
The dialogue that you and I are having today, would that be helpful with the other men and women also?
Yes. You know, anytime, you know, like yourself, that you speak up for a disadvantaged group and put attention, media attention, on a problem that affects the country, maybe the world, you know, that would make that you have compassion for people, and it would make a huge amount of difference. Because, and then me speaking as a disabled veteran myself, that there is attention being put on the plight of homeless people, and there is something that can be done. There are many things that they can do. They've got, the most important thing primarily is get out into the field and go to the mission and establish classes, some kind of classes for them, or just field trips. Let them go to any of the activities in Fort Wayne. Have a veteran's vehicle that picks them up and takes them to activities. So if there is a psychological displacement or disorder, they can integrate themselves back into the system by going to different picnics, to Follinger Center, and to the zoo, and all these other activities that America offers. They need to be interacted in a recreational setting so they can fit in, and so they can feel loved, and they can then, with that way, they interact in the community, and it's a great thing for everybody. It's a win-win situation.
Corporal Jones, thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Eric Hackley, and continue the good and compassionate work that you're doing for the people. I congratulate you on behalf of the disabled American veterans.